this is the missing piece. This is
Yeah.
what we need to know about singing. Our brains sing before we do. And our brains know how singing goes. So it's
Yeah.
really hard to change your singing when you think you're singing. And that's why what I'm doing is really effective with my clients, because we never sing. I almost never would sing with them.
Yeah.
We made crazy, horrible noises, and then they went and got on the stage and they killed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I realized that, this, after my brain exploded and I started like going down that rabbit hole, then I realized, this work we're doing together is affecting their motor memory for singing.
Welcome to the Vocal Lab. I'm Sarah Ramsey, and this show aims to pull back the curtain on the entertainment industry, where veterans give up-and-coming artists some of the information they wish they'd had when they were just starting out. Sort of a music industry primer, if you will. Welcome to the Vocal Lab. I am so pleased today to have author, teacher, and coach Meredith Colby, who hails from Chicago and is the creator of the Neuro Vocal Method, which is an innovative approach to teaching singing for popular styles based on brain science. Neurovocal was first introduced in Meredith's book, Money Notes, How to Sing High, Loud, Healthy, and Forever, and is now being used by over 100 voice teachers and coaches around the globe. With over 25 years as a professional freelance singer and over 30 years as a vocal coach, Meredith has been a band leader, recording artist, singer-songwriter, and theatrical music director. She's given workshops for singers and voice teachers, directed choirs, and was the former director of the Center for Voice, a Chicago nonprofit vocal education resource. Meredith Colby runs professional development classes for voice teachers and coaches, as well as providing private coaching for adult and professional singers. Thank you for joining me today, Meredith.
Thank you for inviting me, Sarah. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you here to get to talk all things voice.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So do you want to tell us your story briefly for those who are just meeting you for the first time today? A little bit about who you are and your journey, how you got here?
How I got the Crib Notes version. Yes. So I was the kid who liked to sing. Yeah. And so my parents, being supportive, bought me singing lessons, which of course they don't tell you, but they were all classical. And my very nice classical teachers molded my young voice to be a classical sounding voice. I did not know what classical singing was. We did not listen to classical singing. That was not what I would have thought my young self would have wanted.
Yeah.
But nobody asks you, they just call it singing lessons and there you are. And then before you know it, you're in the pipeline, and I was in the pipeline.
Yeah.
And so I was at a University of Wisconsin in a program, and then I found the University of Miami Studio Music and Jazz program, and I was like, wow, this is what I want. So I transferred there, and they gave me more classical lessons for my jazz degree. Yay.
You're joking.
So no, not joking. Oh my God, my recital was insane. They probably still do it. The whole idea, you talked to Jess Baldwin about this, but the idea that you have to be good at everything as opposed to finding what you are really magical at. Yeah. So that's what they did. And so anyway, but I was graduated from that program not being able to sing pop with any kind of authenticity at all, or jazz for that matter, any microphone based styles. And the first gig, the only audition that I got cast from at that point was for the Miami Opera Guild. So I was like a chorus member for a season, which was fun and interesting and enjoyable, but not at all what I had in mind, for myself. And so the next gig I got this is before the interweb, so you could do things this way back then.
Yes.
I got a gig with, a picture and a demo tape with a touring band, a road band. And so I went out with this road band it was like 9 months of me like sounding weird and trying to figure out how not to sound weird. And at the end of the 9 months, I stopped singing with the band because I could no longer sing at all or speak for that matter. Like
ouch.
It was, it was ouch. It was pretty bad. It was a matching pair of nodules is what it was. And so then back to the parents' house and therapy and steroids and Reiki and all that, piano lessons and a gig that where I was in charge of the computers. Whose idea was that? It was a very small company, but it turned out to be a really good thing because that's what I learned. So a year of that, and then I felt like I was better, moved to Chicago, called some friends from University of Miami who already lived here, and they said, here's who you need to take lessons from, and here's who you need to call for gigs. So, and there it was. I was off and running. But that experience was pretty, it was a big deal,
Yeah.
It was very scary, and in retrospect, as I became more of a voice educator, I became very sort of adamant that that's not, I should never have had to do that. Neither should anyone else.
Agreed.
And so when I came here and I was studying with a guy named Fred Ferran, he was a jingle singer. He was, you might remember this because you're older than 30, but do you remember Up in the Valley of the Jolly Green Giant? Do you remember that? That was my voice teacher. So anyway, they did a lot of session work in his group. Anyway.
Well, and you don't know this about me, but my family that's what my dad's business was. He was in commercial production, so he wrote jingles and stuff. So like his company wrote Rice-A-Roni. Rice-A-Roni, the San Francisco treat. So yes.
you know
jingle
that
world.
era. Yeah, the jingle world. It was really, really big until the interweb.
Yeah.
And no, not so much anymore. But
yeah.
So Fred brought me into this place. He was a gigging singer. He was not classically trained. He had taken pedagogy from the pedagogy guy here in Chicago. And he, I was like, oh my God, this is what singing feels like. This is the first time in my life I've actually sung. And it was great. And I got kind of excited about it. After about a year and a half of lessons with him, I was like, I also want to teach. And he said, great. First, do no harm, Meredith. And he sent me to the pedagogy guy. And after a year of master's level, I was in a program, but I was in the pedagogy classes. And then after the end of that, I started doing coaching during the week and gigging every weekend. And that was almost 20 years of that.
That's a whole other kind of full plate.
Right. It's a different kind of full plate, but also really great. And I was, Sarah, when I started, I was like, I was an evangelist. I was going to save all the pop singers from the nasty classical teachers, I was all about it. But then as things changed for me, a lot of things changed because I was interested in the environments that my clients were performing in, and I was gigging every weekend with bands, all kinds of different bands, everything from like me and an acoustic guitar all the way to like 12-piece big bands. For a while I was the lead singer for the Nelson Riddle Band and did a little bit of touring.
Really?
And so it's these great smorgasbord of singing opportunities that I got to have during that time. And I learned a lot about what the environments that we have to work in. Even though I wasn't necessarily looking for that information at the time, it was coming to me anyway. Yeah. Anyway, I could keep going, but that's kind of the beginning. I stopped gigging when I was pregnant with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so glad. I had no idea how burnt out I was on gigging and how much I didn't like it anymore. And when I shifted my focus to vocal coaching and being more interested in that, like how voices work and how our singing works in our lives and all that kind of stuff, it was very stimulating to me intellectually.
Yeah.
And that's where the next chapter came from.
Isn't it funny, the different pathways and how I just find it fascinating, especially talking to different voice teachers and voice coaches, how we end up here. For some, it was the intent to start with. And for a lot of people, it was a long and winding road. You know, like when I was in high school, I thought I was going to be a high school music teacher. I was never that kind of music teacher, but I was a gigging music. I went through a jazz program. So I was only ever a pop singer. Pop singer and choral singer. Weird combo, but that's what it was for me. I went through a jazz program because it was the closest learning opportunity that was like going to give me pertinent information that was applicable in the pop world, as opposed to a classical program. I did not have to take classical, although actually
Congratulations.
Thank you. I will say I was in the program, it was at Capilano University here in Vancouver. It was the first year of the jazz degree program that I was there. So it was 1991 that degree program started, and it was brand new. And I believe it was kind of loosely based off the program at North Texas.
They all were.
And were they? Okay. Well,
I mean,
there you go.
North Texas was the first one, and so everybody was kind of looking to them.
Yeah. And I didn't actually have to take classical lessons, but one of my teachers was I did take some classical lessons, but not only. Like I had two different PMI teachers, and one of them was classical and one of them was jazz. That's how they split theirs up. But they hated it because I would do pop tunes as part of my recitals, and I would get shit for it. That's not jazz. That's not okay. Why are you singing a country tune? This is a jazz school. I said, well, but I'm not going to be a jazz singer, so this is applicable for me. I'm still fulfilling your requirements, but I'm doing stuff that's applicable for me. Which
demonstrates an amazing amount of agency and self-knowledge for someone at that age. Most of us don't have that. Most of us are just trying to, follow the rules at that point.
I had the benefit of my mother being on faculty in that program. She was one of the voice teachers.
Okay.
And she was the rock and roll voice teacher. Because prior to being the jazz program, it had been a 2-year commercial music program, which then became this jazz degree. So she had been teaching there when it was the commercial music program, and got swept into the degree program. So she was the one who was fighting for they should still be doing things that are going to let them pay their bills, not just jazz.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to have that most people did not have their mom on faculty backing them up for actually good choices.
Yeah. No.
So here on the Vocal Lab, we aim to shine a light into the industry through the lens of what I know now that I wish I'd known then.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, if you were starting all over again, is there anything that you would specifically do differently?
I think if I were starting over again, I would use the time that I have no responsibilities, right? No mortgage payments, no kids, nothing.
Yes.
To learn piano really well from a good piano teacher. I have a good piano teacher who understood that I was a singer first.
Yep.
I would be really selective about who I took voice lessons from. I would take vocal coaching because I really believe in it. And that would be my music education. I would not get a degree in music at all because I don't think we need those kind of degrees necessarily. And the degrees are just ridiculously expensive for what you get at these days, for what we can charge. And if I was going to go to college, which I probably would, I would get a degree in something that made sense, like business or marketing or pre-law or something that kind of made sense for me, maybe literature. Anyway, something that would help me live my solopreneur life, probably.
Yeah.
That's probably because you went back for marketing. And that's what I think is interesting is when people, and you talked about this when you were talking to one of your other guests, how when you go back as an adult for education, you are informed by living life. And so you make choices that are very different than when you're a kid. Because when you're a kid, especially if you go right to college, which I did not, thankfully, but still, I was still young. I mean, you're an adolescent until you're 26. And when you're still in that phase of your life, you're responding to people's expectations of you, and you're trying to follow the rules, and you're trying to get it right, and you're trying to win approval and all of that stuff, which may or may not serve you, probably won't. In the occasional case, I think it does serve you. But as an adult, you can go back and be selfish about it. And I mean that in the best sense, being able to say, how is this organization, which is charging me a lot of money for this accreditation and this supposedly this knowledge, how are they going to fulfill my needs and give me the knowledge that I need to enhance my life experience in whatever way that I value, be it money or music or contributing to my community or any combination of whatever, right? But you have that sense of like, I'm not doing this to get the piece of paper. I'm doing this because I need to learn.
Exactly.
Which is also
so
why
different.
Carry on.
I'm sorry. No, I was just saying it's such a different perspective, and it means you engage in the learning process so differently. Right. Continue with what you were saying, though.
Yeah. No. To that point, I love to learn so much. I'm constantly reading. I watch documentaries. I will go down rabbit holes. I mean, the internet was the best thing that ever happened to me, honestly. My knowledge of anatomy and physiology now, because of professors who very generously will put up their lectures on YouTube for free. Thank you. It's so much better than it would otherwise have been. I love learning so much. And if I went back, I'd be learning, and I'd probably be that pain in the ass student who really bugged the professor into delivering,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know when I went back as an adult, I loved it because I was not worried about the grade for the grade's sake. I actually got great grades going back as an adult, and I had been a very mediocre student as a younger person. But as an adult, I got great grades, but it was because I was very interested in the information I was learning, and I didn't feel like I had to learn every piece of it. I got to decide which pieces of it were important for me to put my energy into. I also found a huge difference in terms of the balance of I could get a lot more done with a lot less energy as an adult. So I got a lot more payoff for, I understood the balance of energy and return a lot differently than I did as a student straight out of, high school, going right into university. Every assignment was a lot of work. Whereas as an adult, I was single parenting 3 children while I was going back to school and working. So I was I didn't have all the time at my disposal to just be a student. So I had to do it in the most economical way I could. And that was fine, So if you were doing it again, is there anything that you absolutely would do the same all over again?
If I was going to If I was going to go back and do it again, the thing that I would carry with me, I think that I did the first time, was my hunger to experience life as a singer.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not easy.
No,
There was
it's
a
not.
lot of embarrassing things and a lot of things when I think about them, like 20, 30 years later, I'm just like, oh, I'm still embarrassed or ashamed to think about it. There were people that were a little bit scary. There were situations that were really questionable. There were, it's not an easy thing. And you have to keep making it, you have to keep putting yourself out there.
Yep.
Constantly. You have to network, and you have to make phone calls, and you have to make promo stuff, and it's just constant. And it's a lot of work. And also, I would do all that again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
the return on that investment in terms of my life experience, things that I learned, experiences I got to have are that are very unique,
Yeah.
I think those are great, and they were worth everything.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears here a little bit. What brought you to the place where you wanted to look at the intersection between singing and neuroscience, where you wanted to start approaching singing from that perspective and learning about how they intersect?
So that's interesting because most of my life has been sort of a slow boil, except that. And that was when I don't even remember, a long time ago, I found Oliver Sacks, who is a neurologist and a writer. And he had he wrote Awakenings, which was a movie a long time ago, starring Robin Williams. And Robin Williams plays Oliver Sacks. But Oliver Sacks has written a number of books, and I found one of his books and read it and loved it. And then I read another, and then I read another. And then I was like, wow, this is a whole thing. There are other people that write books about brains and how they work in our lives and how they don't work in our lives. So that was just sort of like, I started reading those books because they were fun.
Yeah.
Like a vacation read kind of thing. And that probably went on for about 10 years, I guess.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for a long time, because I didn't know what I was putting together. Meantime, while that was happening, I'm teaching during the week. And all of my students are either they're music theater singers, they're band singers, and they are attorneys. Because I was in the Chicago loop. And, attorneys are mostly just performers who want to make real money. So
I've taught a bunch of attorneys as well, funny enough.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. And they smartly decided to make real money.
Yep.
So those were my clients. And I called myself the voice teacher for Screaming White Boys because some record labels, the A&R people found me and they started sending me their people. And so half of my studio was, leather clad, tattooed, pierced people. Who I absolutely...
I feel like we have a very similar lived experience on some pieces of our lives, actually.
Right. And don't you love those singers?
I really do. I love working with that population of singers. Yeah.
Yes, I do too. They're they take it really seriously, and they're really respectful of the process, and they're really gratifying.
They work hard.
Right? Gratifying clients to have.
Yep.
So here I am during the week, and I'm teaching. Basically, I have thrown out almost everything I learned in the pedagogy class except for the anatomy and physiology, because of course it was classical. It was for classical. So I'm trying to now use what I learned from my teacher and, poking around. Mostly there wasn't very much, to be honest with you. It didn't seem to me like there was much available that would help me with what I was doing, which was these people, and I wanted to serve them in a real way that would really help them in their real experience, not change the way that they were singing, but just make
Yes.
what they were doing sustainable for them.
Yes.
Right? That's what I was trying to do. So I'm kind of like working through seeing here's what works, here's what doesn't work so much. I'm very much not even aware of it, but I'm very much in a coaching framework rather than a teaching framework. And I didn't know the difference back then, but that's just kind of how I roll. And so then after, I don't know, 10 years of that, I picked up this book. I don't even remember the name of it, except I think Brain Hacks was somewhere in the title. And they started talking about the forward model of motor memory in this book, the forward model of motor memory. And I'm looking at it and I'm reading it. And as I'm reading it, my head is slowly exploding. I'm like, oh my God, this is the missing piece. This is what we need to know about singing. Our brains sing before we do. And our brains know how singing goes. So it's really hard to change your singing when you think you're singing. And that's why what I'm doing is really effective with my clients, because we never sing. I almost never would sing with them.
Yeah.
We made crazy, horrible noises, and then they went and got on the stage and they killed it.
Yeah.
Because I realized that, this, after my brain exploded and I started like going down that rabbit hole, then I realized, this work we're doing together is affecting their motor memory for singing.
Yep.
So I worked with that for a while, and then I had this opportunity, like 2015. Friend of a friend, I called this neuroscience researcher, and he's a classical pianist. And I say, I'm thinking of writing a book. I'm just not sure. I know I won't be able to do this kind of work in a real sciencey kind of a setting, but here's what I'm doing. And he was like, oh, well, that sounds interesting. Why don't you come in and we'll put you in the fMRI. We'll work up some AB things, because that's how fMRIs work. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what your brain is doing when you do things. And so an fMRI, if any of your listeners do not know what that is, most people know what an MRI is, right? The magnetic resonance imaging that we get in hospitals these days. So the F stands for functional. And so what it's doing is it's looking at the activity of your brain in real time, kind of.
So instead of it being a still picture, it's like in the action of doing something, right?
Exactly. Yes. Because what we know about brains, one of the things we know about brains is that, generally speaking, when there's activity in a certain piece of real estate in your brain, more blood goes there. And that's what the fMRI can see, is the minerals in the blood. And so we know where the brain is concentrating its energy.
Yeah.
So we did some, and these pictures are in my book and they're on my website, but we did some AB experiments, or AB pictures, which is how it works. And then when I came back a few weeks later and he showed me what he had, and part of the art of fMRI is interpretation, but luckily this is what this guy, Dr. Doug Berman is his name, and it's what he does all day, every day. So he's really good at it. And he said, here's what's happening here, here's what's happening here. Turned out that I'll just cut to the chase, which is when I was singing, there was a lot of brain activity. Lots and lots, and the bilateral activity was incredible, because that's not normal, except with singing, we get a lot of bilateral activity. And so there's a lot, my brain was working hard in all these different areas. And then when I did some of my vocal exercises that I do with my clients that I saw create changes, there's like hardly anything going on. Almost nothing. Nothing in my motor cortex. Like at all. It was really, the pictures are in the book. It's really interesting. And so I'm like, okay, so my brain, at least, obviously this is not an actual study.
Yeah.
Because we have a
Because it's a sample of one.
One, yes, exactly. But at least in my brain, there is a difference between these exercises that I do and singing. There's a big difference.
Right.
So in light of the fact that there is a difference, it means that my brain is going to be more plastic and more willing to accept different behaviors around the activity of singing if it doesn't think it's singing, because it hasn't predicted singing.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that it's interesting. I think it's it never stops being interesting to me.
That's fascinating to me that the possibility that you are going to progress further faster by not doing the thing.
Exactly.
Is not the outcome that you expect.
Exactly.
Not the outcome I expect.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And so this is like, this is me walking up the sand dune, right? Because I know this is true. And I have seen it. And I have 100 people around the world who are also know that it's true, who know it's true and are doing it. And I want everyone to know it, because especially those of us who are teaching in the popular genres. And that's the thing. Okay. When we are learning to a particular thing that has a very specific framework, math, science, engineering, classical art forms. When we are learning to these things, we need a teacher. These subjects must be taught. However, when we are exploring an art form that is outside of the classical realm, we do not need teachers. We need coaches and guides, people who will not take from us the thing which we are trusting to them. And we have so many people out there who don't know the difference and who are taking pop singers, particularly young pop singers, into their studios and saying, "This is singing. I will teach you how to sing." And I really feel strongly that those of us who are interacting and offering our services to pop singers of any popular styles, any of the microphone-based genres, we all need to know what coaching is and how to do it, and how to effectively move between coaching and teaching appropriately for our clients. I feel very strongly about that. So, why did I say that? What were we talking about?
We were talking about, initially we were talking about sort of what brought you to thinking about singing from a neuroscience perspective.
Yes. Okay. So, thank you.
Full circle.
You can leave that "what were we talking about" thing in there if you want.
Absolutely.
So the reason that I say all that is because if we are just coaching, then we don't need to be attached to the sonic outcomes we are helping people create.
Right.
We're not trying to shape a particular sound the way they are in classical. We are saying to them, what's your sound? What feels good to you? What's going to express you most accurately? What's going to be most immediately responsive to your intention? That's what we're doing, and that's brain work. And brains, I don't know if you know this, most people do not, but brains are built to predict. If our brains weren't predicting, if our brains weren't one step ahead of us all the time, we would not be able to move through our day. I certainly would not be able to load up words, and which I'm not doing very well right now.
I never do very well.
Load up words and say them, collect my idea and turn it into a bunch of words and put it forward. I wouldn't be able to, walk from my bedroom to the kitchen. Your brain has to predict. And so, because that is the nature of it. So that's why your brain sings before you do. In order for you to sing, your brain must first sing. Ever think about that, Sarah?
Well, I've had the benefit of actually having taken one of your workshops, so this is not the first time I've heard this information. But prior to having taken your workshop, I had not thought about it in those parameters. The closest I'd ever come was in what is basically sports psychology. I mean, I had seen like a study about, it actually had to do with soccer players and about the way that they practice. And if I'm not going to get any of the details of this study right, just off the bat. So I'm very much going to speak in generalities because I don't remember the details now. It was several years ago that I read this. But it did have to do with taking a group of players and dividing them into groups and tasking them differently. And it was like one group, they worked on their, a specific kind of kick for a specific time frame, and then went away and didn't work on it for a month, and then came back, and how did their results from the day of to the month later with no work in between compare, versus how did the results of the people who worked on it the day of and worked on it in between compare, versus how did the people who worked on it the day of, but every time they took a shot, before they took the shot, they said, here is the thing, here's the specific piece of this skill that I am working on this time, before they took the shot. So I am working on the follow through of my foot, or I am working on the speed of my leg, or like they dissected it, and it was an intent before moving their leg through the ball, every single repetition. It wasn't just a repetition of the movement. It was an intentional setting of this is the thing I'm focusing on. And the difference in the results was vast. And it was the people who had set the intention first before doing the action, even if they did not practice for that month in between, had better results than the people who didn't set the intention but practiced every day.
Yeah.
So that is the closest like analogy, and it comes from sports, psychology, but it's that piece of like the brain setting the intention before pursuing the action that I think is a very parallel to what you're talking about.
Yes, it's definitely a brain's thing. And it definitely uses that predictive nature of the brain for sure. The other thing that it encompasses is a thing we know about brains, which is they do one thing at a time.
Yes.
And that is the thing.
I talk to students about that all the time. We are not going to build 5 skills at the same time. We are going to build one.
Right.
And then we're going to move on and build a different one. And
when we ask people to juggle different intentions, like the whole, this comes up in my classes a lot, where we're talking about our tendency to want to help, because voice teachers are helpers. Vocal coaches are help. We want to help. And so we see somebody doing the thing and they start to do the thing and we go, do this, it'll make it easier. And then they do the thing, we go, do this, it'll make it easier. Do this, you have to fix it. So we tweak. And that is actually, with all the best of intentions, we are making it so much harder for our clients when we do that. So much harder. Brains can do one thing at a time. And when you are talking about motor memory, and really the thing that I am teaching is something that they've basically known in sports medicine for a while. We just, for some reason, have not incorporated into our singing world at all. Yeah. But when you say to somebody, do this thing, one thing, and then you let them do it, their brain will do the work.
Yep.
Their brain will make it easier for them. You, the coach, don't have to fix it and make it easier for them. You just have to be patient and let their brain figure it out. keep reminding them what their single intention is. Here's your intention. Here's your intention. Here's your intention. Here's your intention. And they do, and they do, and they do, and they do. Now, of course, this is what I'm talking about with the dance and of coaching and teaching. Yes, we want to give them guidelines. We want to show them generally what we're shooting for, We don't want to just leave them out there flailing, but the teaching and the tweaking, it makes it really hard. So what you were talking about with these soccer players, it's very likely that they kick the ball and with an intention to make the goal. Right. But that's not an effective intention. That is an outcome that they may or may not be able to control. Mm-hmm. An outcome they can control is, I'm going to kick the ball with my with this many steps and my foot at this angle. Right. And they may not get the exact angle they're looking for the first 12 times, but as they hold that single intention about a physical response to that intention, and they focus their attention on the outcome of that intention, their body will start to respond appropriately to their intention. And that's what those guys did. And we can do that too in our studios.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, once I really started to understand in my teaching / coaching, that concept of like, our brains can only do one thing at a time. I actually now use those words with students all the time. Good. Our brains can think about one thing at a time. Good. So we're going to do one thing at a time, and then we're going to move on, whether this lesson or another lesson, whatever. We do one thing, and then we do one other thing. Eventually, we work on marrying those things, but not until each of those things feels really solid on their own do we think about combining them. Yep. And because when you're trying to remember 5 things, you are not actually remembering 5 things. You are cycling between 5 things individually. And eventually that cycle will get faster and whatever. But, anyway, as I started to figure that out, I very much changed the way I interact with students. Like you're saying, stopped interrupting and saying, okay, but, now just, and I started making notes I didn't used to make notes during people's lessons, and now I do, because now if I have a thought of, okay, but now I just write it down. Good and for whether you. We come back to that later in the lesson or in a future lesson or whatever, I don't have to say it to them in that moment, but I'm also always so worried about my own memory that if I don't write it down, I won't remember it. So that's how I have chosen to bridge that gap, is I will write it down, and then we get back to it when we get back to it.
Or I'm guessing a lot of times it just solves itself.
Lots of times it does. Yeah.
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 Because their brains figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Thanks for joining us today. So that was actually just part 1 of our interview. And I would love it if you come back on Thursday to check out the second part of our interview. There's so much more juicy goodness. I can't wait for you to check it out.